Hello. Today on Mental Health Discovery and Recovery, we have a wonderful guest named Seth Nelson. He's an attorney in Tampa, not far from where I am. And he has a podcast called How to Split a Toaster. And we've shared some banter before, but this is a subject we're going to talk about today. Called undue influence. We're going to talk about how that affects people. And Seth is a family attorney, he's a mediator, and he also has the podcast, How to Split a Toaster. I want you all to find that and remember it. I'll say it again. And you can find him on nelsonlg.com. I like to do that up front and at the end. So thank you, Seth, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, lots of people have heard of gaslighting, brainwashing, all these pop psychology terms for narcissistic abuse, but undue influence is more of a legal term. And could you describe to us what undue influence is? Define that for us.
Yeah, and I hate using legal definitions because it's just a bunch of googly gook,
Mhm.
so I want people to understand that undue influence is when somebody exerts such power over another person that that other person is not making their own decisions.
And it
That's
can be
really
very
what.
subtle.
Oh, it could be a lot of things. So let's just give a typical example that comes up in the law all the time, just to put some meat on that bone, right?
Yes, thank you.
Think of an elderly person that has a caregiver who is constantly with them 24/7 or comes in every day and is there for 8 hours a day and is caring for them, help bathe them, help make their meals, make sure their medications are proper. And all of a sudden, a new will gets signed by the elderly person. That is ripe. And in that new will, that caregiver gets given a lot of money or most of the estate, not a family member.
Mhm.
And family members can also unduly influence their elderly relatives, but I'm just giving this hypothetical. Not a family member, was working for an agency, never met this person before the last year when they were caring for them. So that's the type of scenario that is just ripe for someone to take advantage of an elderly person and unduly influence them, persuade them, like, oh, yeah, let's change your will. Your relatives aren't here. I'm the one caring for you. I've done so much for you, and really just start planting those seeds and goes and picks the lawyer that is going to prepare the documents and sets up for the lawyer to come over with two witnesses. And sometimes they'll be very sly, like they'll leave the room. They won't be there when it's actually signed because, oh, I wasn't there when it's
Wow.
signed, right? So there's lots of things that people can do. And depending on the type of case, whether it's um, a will, there's specific law in Florida. Check your local jurisdiction because people hear these podcasts all over the country and all over the world. But in Florida, there's very specific on what you need to prove and how it gets proved and who is responsible for proving what. The person that's now the person who's inheriting all the money versus the family that's challenging that will, saying there was due to undue influence.
Good to know. So can this happen to someone who isn't elderly? I'll just ask that question right up front.
Yes, all the time. So a lot of people can be unduly influenced. Now, the key word is unduly. We're
Yes.
always influenced,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, that was my next question. There's a, I know enough about this subject to be dangerous, but I also know how dangerous it is for my mental health clients. So can you kind of describe the difference, like compare and contrast undue influence with just plain old influence?
Well, it's really the overtaking of the other person, right? So we'll call it the person who's being influenced versus the evildoer, right? If that evildoer is taking over the person being influenced to such an extent that they're not making their own decisions, that's unduly influenced. Now, what you're really asking me for, which I can't provide, is a strict like line in the sand of, oh,
Okay.
here it is, right? Because there's always a bunch of different factors that will go into consideration that then ultimately there is going to be a trial, and the trier of fact, usually a jury or a judge, will make the determination on whether, in this particular case, with these facts, how they were presented, they believe that this person was unduly influenced as opposed to just influenced, right? So let's
Yes.
talk about a lot of stuff in mental health. If, and this can be on anything, it can be for signing a deed over where you're giving ownership of a house. It could be in a divorce setting where people are getting divorced and you're signing a marital settlement agreement or a parenting plan. Okay.
Mhm.
So the keys there are to make sure that if you're the one signing the document, you understand what your rights are. You understand that you have choices, that you don't have to sign the document, that you're allowed to go to trial, right?
Yes.
So, for example, when a client says to me, "Oh, I don't have a choice," I'm like, "Whoa, stop. Yes, you do." You might not like your choice. Your choice might be expensive, time consuming, stressful,
Hmm.
but you have a choice, and it's your right to say, "I don't want to deal with the trial. I don't want to deal with the lawyers. I don't want to have that stress. So I will take less money in this settlement because I'm getting my life back."
Yes.
Right? That's a
Yes.
legitimate choice.
Yes.
But they have to understand that they're making that choice. And that's part of the lawyer's job, is to protect them, to make sure they understand and that the other person isn't unduly influencing them. It's really hard to prove unduly influence if you're at a mediation.
I'll
Or
bet. What this will help people, I think, so much. What makes it so difficult to prove or to expose is a better word. Proof is again one of those legal terms, it's more concrete, but you and I like semantics. So there's subtle semantics to it. So it is difficult to prove, but how can you recognize it, maybe is a better term. How can
right.
somebody recognize it in them, in their own, like a divorce mediation? I see it a lot, as you do probably.
Right. So let's talk about the word proof first, and then I'll come back to recognize.
Great. Thank you.
I use the term proof differently than most. When a client comes to me and they say, "Oh, I have proof and I've got evidence," I'm like, "No, you don't. What you have is information."
Yes.
It's my job as the lawyer to determine whether that information is relevant and persuasive. So if we're in court, I can then get it into evidence, which I want people to think of a movie screen behind me, right? So if I get it into evidence, it's on the movie screen and the judge can look at it. The judge can hear it. The judge can watch it. But just like there's rules on movie screens, if it's a G-rated movie versus an R-rated movie on what's allowed on that screen, there's rules in the courtroom on what's allowed on that screen, and those are called the rules of evidence. And
Okay.
we've all heard the word hearsay, right? People say, "Oh, you can't have hearsay." Technically, that's true, but then there's a lot of exceptions. So my point for proof and evidence is, if we get it into evidence, it's now on the screen. Does that ultimately prove in the judge's mind what we want it to prove? I'm a good parent, or I deserve so much alimony, or child support should be this, or we should divide this asset like that. In all the movies that I go to when I'm in trial, they're all a mystery because I don't write the ending. The judge writes the ending. So
Yes.
you have information, you get it to your lawyer, see if they can get it into in court, they get it into evidence on the movie screen. Does that prove what we want it to prove? So the judge writes the ending that we want. That's how I use the word proof
Beautiful.
and evidence. Okay.
Yes.
Now, back to what you said. Well, how can we be aware of it? Well, how can we recognize it? So if the document is signed at home with no notaries, no witnesses, no one else is around, what was really happening there, right?
Right.
And unduly influence also goes with duress and coercion. We usually do all three. So if someone's holding a gun to your head, you're under duress, you're unduly
Yes.
influenced, right? Like, you don't have a choice. You're going to sign it. So that's where I would be looking out for it. So even when my clients say, "Look, I've talked to my spouse, we have an agreement," I say, "Great, send me the terms and I'll write it up and we'll make sure it gets signed properly." Right? And in terms of COVID, like I would double check. I would review it with my client. Are you okay with this? Are you okay? I would write notes, save it in my file. I met with my client on this day. We reviewed these provisions. We made edit to these. We're good. Send it to her. Are you okay? Yes, I'm okay with this. I would have them come in for a meeting. And the reason I do all that is because during COVID, or if you're sending it out via DocuSign, I don't know who's standing next to you when you DocuSign that document. So
That's
you
so
got
true. I had
you
the same thing happen with mental health clients. They have to, they're responsible for their own privacy at some point, but you know,
that's
you have,
right.
it's a telehealth trepidation instrument when you have to do that. You have to tell them you have to be responsible for your own
Yep.
privacy. However, if they're being unduly influenced, you
That's a
won't know.
problem.
You really
That's
won't.
right.
It's a problem.
So where are they signing the document? Are they alone? Um, what have been the discussions between the parties? Have there been any threats of violence? Have there been any promises of other things to you that's not in the document? Right?
Yes.
Oh, if you sign this, I'll take care of you. Don't worry about what this says.
Oh,
You know,
yes, I hear that so much in my office with not in mediation, but in practice. Oh, I know because I'm not looking at their legal documents, but I am listening to them saying, oh, my husband and or wife, they would never do that to me. In this divorce, they'll be fair to me. They'll be a good parent. They'll do this and do that. So, and you and I have talked about codependency before, and I'm a recovered one of those, and they are highly likely. And codependency is not a formal mental health disorder. It ought to be. We called it pathological altruism a long time ago, which Barbara Oakley coined. But who other than a codependent who's, easy to bend their will? Mental health issues. I know you're not a mental health counselor, but you are legal counsel. Who's most likely to be, I don't like to use the word victim either, but who's most likely to be unduly influenced that you've seen?
well, there's always a power struggle in every relationship, right?
Okay.
That's going through a divorce. So usually it's the person with less power.
Which sometimes means less money.
It might be less money. It might be that
Home.
they are always the codependent, right? There.
Mhm.
And also where are they in the grief process? Getting a divorce is grief. You're
Yes.
going through the grieving process. So be careful when you're in the bargaining stage that you will do anything to save this marriage. And then they come to you and say, well, sign these divorce papers, this marital settlement agreement that divides up our assets and debts and deals with alimony and child support and other financial issues. Oh, and by the way, also sign this parenting plan that deals with how we're going to raise the children, where they're going to be for, in Florida, we call it time sharing, but most people think of it as custody and visitation. If you do all this, we'll get it signed. And you know what? We'll get divorced, but we're going to keep dating afterwards. But I just need to get this behind us in case things don't work out in the future. And then let's try to rebuild our marriage from there. Because if you're in the bargaining stage and you'll do anything to save your marriage, you'll sign those documents because all you hear is the promise of we'll work on our marriage after we sign the documents.
I
And
want
that's what you're going to
everyone to
latch on.
hear
So
that. I want everyone to hear what you just said. I want everyone to latch on to that. What you just said. Everybody listening needs to latch on to how subtle undue influence can be, because what's in writing, as Seth said, is what the judge is going to see, what the judge can make decisions on, what's going to happen to your future. And the power struggle is very important to understand. And people that might suffer from depression, or you said they'll do anything to save this marriage, they'll also do anything to get out of a marriage. Like, I'll sign anything to get out of this marriage, and they end up
that's a little different though.
but it's not to undue influence. Yeah.
That's right. Because if they're saying, look, I'm done. I don't want the stress of this. I don't want this. I don't want that. Now, those clients, I have them sign a CYA letter. I'm advising you not to enter in this agreement. I don't think it's in your best interest. The court would award you more of X, Y, or Z. And they got to sign a letter. And then I'm, as their lawyer and as an officer of the court, if they come back later and say, oh, I shouldn't have done it. I'm like, I hate to say it, but I told you so.
I
Right.
told you so.
Like,
Yeah.
right. But people make that decision all the time. And what I always tell them is, even with people that are not being unduly influenced or not being, no coercion, no duress, but they're just done and they don't want the fight and they want their life back, right? A lot of people, after they sign all these documents, have buyer's remorse because they think about what they gave up. I could have gotten more money. I could have got more time with the kids. I really wanted to have that holiday with the kids every year, and I did it every other year. Or, oh, I feel like I got screwed. And everyone feels like they get screwed in their divorce, because the reason why is the divorce law isn't necessarily fair or equitable, despite what everyone thinks it should be. So, you just naturally feel that way. What they forget is what they got is their life back, and they didn't have to listen to lawyers, talk to lawyers, go to a trial, go to depositions. Like, all that stress is gone, but no one thinks about that down the road, right? They just think about the
Right.
actual dollars and cents or time with the kids.
So I hope people got that subtle difference. If you're just signing something, I just want this over with, it's not undue influence. Unless the person is saying, if you sign this now, we can get this over with, and I'll promise you this, but they don't put it in writing. So
Yeah,
it all goes
and to be
back.
clear, I can't tell you exactly what undue influence is and say
It's so
this is and
blurry.
this is not,
Right.
because I'm a lawyer and I went, oh, it depends, right? Well, it depends on the
Yes.
facts. It depends on where you signed it. It depends on what was happening. It depends on, were you on medication at the time?
Mhm.
Did you understand what you were doing? Were you recovering from surgery? And your discharge paper says don't sign any legal documents for 2 days, and then you sign the legal document. So there's so many factors.
Yes. I know it should be so much longer than 2 days. I mean,
I
anesthesia lasts a
know.
lot longer than 2 days. Somebody
I
will rework that law eventually.
I don't know. I just recently had surgery and they said, don't sign any legal documents for 2 days. I'm like, I'm a lawyer. Like, I got to get back to work. Like, what are you talking about? Don't
Oh,
make it a
yeah.
week.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, but nothing that would probably harm you. But this brought up the subject when you were speaking. Who's most likely to commit undue influence? Because that's everybody hears what it is, because there are elements of it, and I want to go back to that in a second. And I know there's no concrete ones, but who's most likely to do this to somebody else? What kind of person would be this Machiavellian to do this to someone?
Well, people that I think are insecure, want control, people that feel like they're always right, the narcissists that we all know, like any of those
Yes.
people are going to try to really control the mind of someone else, because that's what we're talking about,
Hmm.
right? Where the mind must be so controlled or affected by persuasion or pressure, artful or fraudulent, right? And by insidious influence of a person in a close confidential relationship, that it's not left to act on their own intelligence, understanding, and voluntarily making their own decisions, but they're acting on the will of that other person. So, what
Yes.
kind of person's going to exert their will on you to get what they want? You
Mhm.
just described every narcissist.
Thank you. I was hoping you would say that, or sociopath, which is
Yeah.
on the same cluster of personality disorders, or a borderline maybe, but mostly narcissists and sociopaths. And they do it there, and especially fragile narcissists will do it in a way that's so, and a fragile narcissist is what pop psychology calls a covert narcissist. They're all nicey nice and stuff like that. But um, so they would be most likely. And how could somebody prevent themselves from becoming a target, is a better term instead of a victim, a target of undue influence, or just being controlled?
Well, I don't think you can ever protect yourself from being a target. I think you can protect yourself on how you handle it when you're being shot at, because you can't control what the other people do. So when a client says, I just want them to be a good parent, I'm like, I can't make them be a good parent, and neither can a judge, right? So when you're
Correct.
saying don't be a target, you're really trying to influence what that other person is doing. And I focus with my clients on what they're doing.
Okay.
So, what are some things you can do to protect yourself if you are the one that's trying to be manipulated? You can get a lawyer to make sure that any documents you sign are being reviewed by a lawyer and you understand your rights and what, if any, rights you're giving up.
Hmm.
You can um, make sure that you're by yourself or with your friends or being signed in front of a notary whenever you sign any documents, because that's a level of protection that you are on, um, acting on your own behalf.
Yes.
Now, there are notary services all over the state, all over every city. I'm not saying the guy drives you there and says, go in and get it signed and notarized and comes back. Like, did you drive your own car? Did you have the document for 2 weeks before you signed it? Did you have it reviewed by a lawyer? There's lots of things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice, everything I'm saying is separating you from the evildoer, you
Yes.
from the narcissist, getting you your space, talking to a professional. That's the type of thing that you need to do to protect yourself. And that's a sign that you're being unduly influenced, is when they say, we don't need lawyers involved.
Aha. Good point. And I've noticed there's no socioeconomic level to things that are being coerced. We more call it coercion in in mediation, or in as a mental health counselor, someone is feeling coerced or unduly influenced. And a narcissist is so good at it. They're so good at it.
Yeah,
And
we don't need to spend the money. Why do we need lawyers? We're going to waste all that money.
right. They will say
Yeah.
that.
And what people will say, and I get this all the time, is people, rightfully so, there are two great questions people ask me when they're called me to hire me as their lawyer. How much will this cost and how long will it take? And I don't have a good answer for either of those. I tell them an average divorce takes between 6 and 18 months if you let me do my job and move it forward.
Yes.
I can only go as fast as the slowest person or entity. Right now, if I'm trying to schedule a trial and it's November, I might not get a trial date till March or April of next year because the court system is that backed up.
Yes, it is. In most
So,
states, it is. COVID really
yeah.
backed it up even more.
So there's all sorts of things that will delay your case. Sometimes it will be you when I ask you to get me documents and you don't. When I schedule appointments with you and you cancel, right? When we're supposed to get documents from the other side and they don't do it. And then I have to write a letter to the lawyer. Then 10 days later, I have to file a motion and then I have to set it for a hearing. And I get a hearing 35 days later. So now we're like 45, 55, 62 months days delayed. And then when I get to the hearing, the judge says, we'll give it to them in 10 more days. Okay. And then they don't do it. Now I have to go back again. So there's all sorts of ways that things can go slower. And everything I just described to you takes more of my time and I get paid by my time. Therefore, it costs you more money.
I understand. And you said something in there too about the witnesses. I don't know all of the elements that we're going to get to, but I do know one. I make it very easy for my clients. I used to be a songwriter in my previous life in Nashville as a professional. So I like to make things rhyme. It makes it easier. But I always say that narcissists and sociopaths interrogate you under the guise of wanting to know a little bit about you. They're actually filing information. So they interrogate, infiltrate your life, then they isolate, then they annihilate. Now, I know that those are not the elements of undue influence, but they certainly are the psychological stuff it's made of. And isolation, I know there's no socioeconomic level to undue influence. There just isn't. The case is, there was a movie called Love and Mercy about Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and that was a case that was actually won. And it was an amazing film because it really took a look at, it doesn't matter who you are, how much money you have, how much influence you have in the world, you can still be influenced by someone else. So could you go over some of the elements so people could, maybe it might spark a little not paranoia, but it might spark some recognition for somebody who may feel like they're listening to this conversation and being unduly influenced or just coerced.
Yeah. So here's the thing that's always dangerous about this and always gives me pause, is when you start listing out the elements, and let's just talk about what an element is. It's exactly what the lawyer has to prove to the judge happened. Okay.
Okay.
And so when you do that, people start saying yes, yes, yes. And what they don't realize, and this happens in every case, so I'm going to talk about some differences here and think about when a lawyer tells you elements, is you will only pick out the elements that are in your favor. And there's always two sides to a story.
Yes.
Okay. And when you're going through those elements, very rarely do I have a client that comes in and says, here's the 20 different parenting factors. Let me tell you where I'm really bad at them. They'll tell me all day long that the other parent is bad at all the stuff that they're good at. They never tell me what they're bad at.
Aha. That's so
Okay.
true. Same thing in counseling.
Exactly. So that's why I always am very hesitant to do this. But let me give you example, okay, of what I mean when there's two sides to every story, if we have a little time.
Oh, we do. Thank you. That's exact. I was going to ask you for an example, a living
Okay.
example, and you can compile it, of course, because we have confidentiality.
No, this is an example I give all the time. Now,
Okay.
in a divorce case, and a lot of trials and court cases, there's something called a deposition where you have to sit down and answer questions under oath. And then we all know, as we see from the movies, though it doesn't really work that way, that in court, you're on the witness stand and your lawyer will ask you questions, or the other lawyer will ask you questions, and then your lawyer gets a chance, and then the other lawyer gets another shot at you. It's called direct, cross, redirect. So I'm going to put you on the spot. You ready?
Yes.
You're going to be the judge in this case. And I am going to be the lawyer asking the father questions.
Okay.
And I'm the mother's lawyer in my first example. Then I'm going to change roles. At the end of my questioning of the father, before his lawyer has a chance to question him, I'm going to tell you that you have to make a decision on the case. Now, you've only heard one side, but that's what we're going to do. And this really lays out the example. So
Okay.
here we go.
Great.
Okay. I'm the lawyer representing mom. I got dad on the stand. Sir, are you asking for a 50-50 time sharing in this case? Yes. Sir, out of the last 365 days, how many overnights did you spend with the children? 5. Did your wife, the mother of the children, prevent you from having any overnights in the last 365 days? No. Sir, how many times have you called your children in the last 365 days? 0. Sir, how many times have you written any letters to your children in the last 365 days? 12 times. Did your wife prevent you from communicating with your children in any way, shape, or form over the last 365 days? No. And you're asking this court to award you 50-50 time sharing? Yes.
Oh
Okay.
my. Okay.
Now, that's all the information you have.
Okay. Will we get to hear the other side too?
Yeah, but not before you make your
Great.
decision.
Okay, so because I have that mediator counselor, there's facets and flaws to everyone. They bring their facets in that shine and the flaws they cover. So I'm going to say, based solely on what I heard, if I'm not allowed to hear anything else, the gavel points to giving the custody to the mother, just based on what I've heard.
Right. He's not getting
I feel
50-50.
but I feel like, but wait, there's more.
Right. Okay. But why are you giving that to mom?
Because he has absolutely not taken an active role in parenting, hasn't called them, hasn't written them, that I would feel like he may be a neglectful parent based solely on the information
Right.
given.
And you got to it. You got to the assumption. The assumption is he's a neglectful parent. Everything else you said was right.
Right.
So what I do as a lawyer is I attack the assumptions. So here we go. I'm now dad's lawyer. Dad is still on the stand. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, are you currently employed? No. What do you do? I'm retired. When did you retire? Yesterday. What was your previous employment? I was a United States naval officer. Sir, where were you stationed for the last 365 days? On the United States aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt. And how many days was the United States aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt in port? 5 days. Where did you stay for those 5 days? With the children overnight. Sir, how often are you allowed? Where was the United States naval aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt for the other 360 days? Out at sea. Are you allowed to make any phone calls off that aircraft carrier? No. Are you allowed to write send any letters. Once a month, we're allowed to send letters. Where do you live now? 5 minutes from the marital home, which is also 5 minutes from the children's school. And do you currently have time to care for the children on a 50-50 basis? Yes. What leads you to that conclusion? I am now retired, and I can drop them off and pick them up from school on any days that are my days, and I'm happy to be a backup for my spouse. She's a great mother, but sometimes if people get sick, I'm happy to be there to be for the children. Now, how do you rule on this case?
I absolutely love this, Seth. This is why I talked to you about this. Because of the one day in retirement, you see how one tiny element of anything can change everything. Of course, that man is not going to be a neglectful parent. The judge would just, I would say as a judge, please help me to reiterate and solidify that you're fully retired, live 5 minutes, and have no intention of moving. I know in Florida it's like a 50-mile radius, but you know that you have no intention of moving. And I would rule for the 50-50. I absolutely would. The gavel would go for 50-50.
Those are two different stories.
Yes, the totally different stories.
Right. And that's what people don't realize, that when they're being deposed or when they're in court and the other side gets a shot at them, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
I said, if their lawyer is asking you questions, you should look like the worst mother in the history of mothers by the end of that case.
Yes.
Right? Like that's their
Yes.
job.
That's their
right?
job, to discredit the witness, even in a divorce.
You
I've
know,
always said, I think
so,
for part of being in a divorce, and I've been through one, and I know you said in your bio you have too, but I said, I don't need a divorce attorney. I need a defense attorney.
right.
Because they just discredit things. And you know, that's their job. I have a friend who's she's a therapist who only does, like Dr. Phil used to do, litigation counseling. And she said it's their job to rip people's guts out, you know, the opposing attorney, and it's your job to help people keep their guts in. So what you just described is what we've talked about.
Right. And what I try to do is tell
okay.
people, look, my job is to advocate, and there's different
Yes.
ways to advocate. So
Yes.
I will do everything I can to settle a case, but when I'm in court, it's game on. Now, you can be professional, you can be, and you should be, you can be polite, you can be calm, you can ask pointed questions, you can make sure you're getting the answers. And if you don't get the answers, the judge knows they're not answering the question. And ultimately, you can just move on because you've proved your point by their behavior.
Yes.
And getting back to the narcissists.
Thank you. I was headed that way.
They all think that they're smarter than everyone in the room. And just by their behavior and how they answer questions or don't answer questions or try to ask questions back, it just exposes their personality. And these judges,
thank you. Narcissists always answer questions with questions.
Right.
It's like a form of blame shifting. Help me understand why you weren't there for your kids. Or are you there for your kids all the time? They just constantly do that.
Right. And what I do, and I've seen other lawyers do this very effectively, is let's say you're in court and they ask a question of me, the lawyer. I say, oh, I'm sorry, sir. The way this works is that I will ask you a question. Please wait to answer until I complete my question. And then if it's a yes or no question, please answer yes or no. And then you have time to respond and give, you know, if you want to explain your answer, you're allowed to do that. Do you understand that procedure? I'm not answering that. Or do you understand the procedure? I'm like, sir, once again, I'm not, you know, and I'll do it twice. And then when he doesn't do it, I'll say, Your Honor, I would request that the court instruct the witness. And then the judge looks down and says, answer the question.
Aha.
Right? So,
yes.
But you do it very politely.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't get your client any points to be a jerk. In fact, I think it can distract from the evidence and the persuasive argument, right?
Yes. So in the organic flow of this conversation, the judge can expose, or an attorney can expose, just like I do in a mental, like if I'm just seeing a couple for marriage counseling, you don't really have to expose a narcissist. They kind of will expose themselves with just let them talk. kind of like, we're down here in Florida where people fish, you just let a grouper take that line all the way down to the bottom, right? So is that a way that somebody could recognize if they're being unduly influenced, to see just how hard somebody's pushing on them in their isolation or fear? And I know that people who control use fear as their greatest tool. Fear and
Oh,
self-doubt, fear and
fe-
self-doubt, fear
fear's
and self-doubt.
look, fear's a motivator.
Yes,
Everyone
it is.
everyone thinks fear is bad. I don't think fear is necessarily bad.
No,
If
it
I'm in the
protects us.
woods and there's a bear coming at me, I'm good with being afraid, right?
As fear protects us. Yeah.
It's what you do with that fear, and whether it paralyzes you or not, whether it allows you to be unduly influenced. So, am I allowed to curse on this show?
Of course.
Okay, so here's my other favorite game, and this is why I think people should talk to lawyers. Is my favorite game. It's called bullshit. So the way I play this game is I talk to a client and they will say, well, my husband says that he's going to take the kids away from me and I'm never going to see them again.
Mm.
And then I say, let's play my favorite game called bullshit. And I said, the answer to that is bullshit. And then I say, tell me something else your husband says. That we've been married for 20 years and I haven't worked and I'm not going to get any money and I'm going to be homeless and penniless. Bullshit. Right? That it doesn't matter that my name's on the deed. He's the one that paid for the house and therefore that I'm going to have to move out. Bullshit. So that's what you can do to protect yourself. If you go talk to someone, make a list of 5, 10 things that they say to you all the time and just say, is this true?
Thank you. I hear it all the time. And I always raise the BS flag. And I ask my clients too, may I please cuss? I ask my clients that. I said that I raise the bullshit flag on that because they do believe that. And so they are maybe we can't call it legal undue influence in my practice, but we can certainly call it coercion or an abuse of power or a belief system or narcissistic abuse. And that's usually what it is, a controller and a controllee. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Somebody who feels isolated, fear, even guilt. They may have done something wrong that makes them feel like they have to.
I deserve to have nothing. I had an affair for 5 years.
Exactly. I deserve nothing. I hear that all the time. Can you address that person? Because that is something we could probably lift 1,000 stones off somebody's head right now. Just that. I love that it came up in conversation. I hear it a lot.
There is the real world, there's the perceived world, and there's the legal world. Mm-hmm. They don't overlap and they don't match. So in your perceived world, you could be telling yourself, I don't deserve anything because of X. The legal world might say that doesn't matter. You're still entitled to half the value of the house. Mm-hmm. You're still entitled to see your children. You're still entitled to child support. You're still entitled to alimony. So don't let your own belief system prevent you from seeking and getting quality legal counsel to tell you what the legal world will say about those things.
Yes, that's why I send people to you, and you would send people to someone like me to relieve that guilt. The guilt is toxic. It turns into shame. Guilt is I did something bad, so you don't do it again. It's like fear. It protects you. Shame is I am bad and I deserve nothing. Right. So listen well to what Seth is going to say right now.
Well, take the reverse of that. I'm the guy that has to pay alimony to my soon-to-be former spouse of 20 years. And when I went to work every single day, working hard, bringing all the money in, never pressuring her to work, she was raising the kids, and it turns out that she wasn't volunteering, that she wasn't doing all this stuff that she told me she was doing. But every day from 10 to 2, she was having an affair. Now, that's really unfair. Mm-hmm. And even though an affair is in the statute in Florida under alimony, in my very long career, I've never had a judge really take that into consideration. So
especially in no fault states, it comes up less and less, I think.
Exactly.
Yes, sometimes if my clients have exceeding guilt, I know it may sound irreverent, but it does kind of help them. I said, I'm not an attorney. I have an invisible one standing next to me that tells me I can't give you legal advice, but you need to talk to one. But in the state that we're in, you could sleep with the Dallas Cowboys and all the cheerleaders, and it probably won't affect the outcome of what a judge would decide, but you'll need to speak to your attorney about it.
And
So,
that's the difference between the real world, the legal world, and the perceived world. And
yes.
I always, when I explain this to clients, I literally put the real world, RW, put a circle
Okay.
around it. Perceived world, I put a triangle around it. In legal world, LW, I put a box around it because we're boxed into the legal world.
Yes, that's why mediation is so powerful, isn't it, Seth? Because mediation, they can rewrite the laws of whatever state they're in. They can decide between them to agree on things and disagree, or even partial agreements. So anything before we close up today about undue influence, coercion, control, narcissistic abuse, anything that came up in our conversation that sparked something in you?
Well, we've mentioned mediation a couple times, so we should touch on that and why it's hard to get unduly influenced when you're there.
Yes.
So mediation is a process. You and your lawyer go, the other party and their lawyer go, and the mediator is a third party neutral that goes back and forth between each room and tries to settle the case. And you point out something that's very important to know. If the law says X, that's fine, but you guys can agree to do stuff that is not in line with the law as long as the judge will ultimately approve it, which normally they do. There's some circumstances they can't, but most times they can. Okay. So what you'll hear from that narcissist controlling spouse of yours before you get there is you don't have to listen to your lawyer. It doesn't matter what the law says. We can do anything we want. That gives them an opening, and they're going to run that train right through that opening.
Yes.
So you can say, yeah, that's true. We don't have to do what the law says, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to do what the law says. And you're allowed to stick with the law. And good lawyers will tell you in a very narrow range of what will happen at court. They can never promise you that's what will happen. They should tell you what should happen. Very narrow range, what should happen in court. Hard to tell you what will happen because the judge can get it wrong. He can have a bad day. You
Yes.
never know what's going to happen. It can turn on a dime. There could be a new fact that your lawyer didn't know about the time that you didn't tell him and didn't come out and discuss. There's a lot of things that can go bad in trial.
Mhm.
So what's the magic of mediation? The magic of mediation is all the decision makers and legal counsel are there at the same time focused on your case. And my clients get very frustrated because we show up, we have already sent an offer, we know what we're going to do, we know what we're going to counter with, we've looked at it from all different angles.
Mhm.
So mediator does an opening for 20 minutes, goes to the other side, does their opening for 20 minutes. We've now been there 40 minutes. They come back to us, takes us a half hour to go through a parenting plan, and we send over the offer. And then we wait 2 hours. And my client's frustrated, like, what's taking so long? I said, probably they're not prepared like we are. But I'd rather
Yeah.
wait 2 hours than 3 weeks. Because
Yes.
if we send over a parenting plan and the lawyer's in trial, then they go on vacation and then they get sick, and then your spouse is, you're having a kid's birthday, so you don't want to deal with it then. And then it's homecoming for your kid, so you don't want to deal with it that week. Like, it just takes too long to go back and forth where everyone's focused on the same day. And that's the key to mediation. Now, be careful. The longer you sit there, it's like buying a car. The more they keep you in that dealership, the higher likelihood you're going to buy a car. The longer you're there, eat during mediation. Stay hydrated.
Yes.
Have your list of things that are really important for you. Be prepared, right? So when it gets late in the day, you got to decide what's really important for you. Stay focused on the big things. A lot of the little things won't matter in the long run.
Do you ever suggest your clients go to mental health counselors? Because I do a lot of pre-mediation and pre-divorce. Even I do what they call conscious uncoupling, like people that are getting a divorce before they even set foot in a courtroom, not do it yourself, but through an attorney or through a mediator. Do you ever tell people to come work out those little small details, work out the emotional stuff with a counselor?
I'm always advising my clients that the best thing they can do is live their life, not their divorce.
Yes,
And the
absolutely.
one way to do that is go to mental health counseling, which if you get a good one, that's the only time in your life that you can have an hour with someone that's totally focused on you.
Totally. Yes.
right? Your friends, they get tired of hearing it. They all have their own agenda. Your family has their own agenda. So if you have a good mental health counselor and you're willing to put in the work, they should be focused on you, not on the other party, and helping you get through this process. So I tell clients all the time, easiest thing I can tell you, hardest thing to do, live your life, not your divorce. So what does that mean? It means I'm going to give you homework. I don't expect it all back tomorrow, but I'd like you to set aside some time on your calendar to do your homework. And if you have questions, call us, email us, write us, stop by the office. We'll help you through it. But don't stress about get me all those documents tomorrow. We don't need them tomorrow. Here's your deadline. Let's work. We'll follow up with you. Let's set an appointment to review a parenting plan. I'm going to come up with ideas that you haven't thought of. Why? Because I've been doing this for a long time and I've lived it in my own life. You haven't done this before. So obviously I have more experience. I'm going to give you some things to think about. Some of it's not right or wrong. It's just different.
It's just different, unique.
Yes. Those are the type of things that we talk about prior to mediation. So at mediation, we're prepared. And what's frustrating is if the other side hasn't met with their lawyer and done that preparation, when we come back with an offer from them and we're like, we don't like that, but we have 3 different choices. Here's 1, 2, 3 that we prefer. Send over the first one. And then they got to talk about 1, 2, 3 on the other side. Right. So it just sometimes takes longer, but that's what I'd tell you. The focus of mediation should be prepared and understand that even if you're waiting a long time, it's less than 3-4 weeks than normally. And the magic is everyone's focused at the same time.
Yes. And like, be prepared and you won't be scared is what I tell people. Just be prepared and to listen to your lawyer. And also you're the lawyer. You are a lawyer who listens to their clients. So some, I hear, I hear complaints. I go, no, part of it may be that you need to work out some of your emotional stuff in my office so that you're taking them things that are relevant to what they can do in their scope of expertise. So I just appreciate your time today and explaining kind of undue influence. And if somebody feels isolated instead of insulated, if somebody feels afraid of someone, if somebody feels like they're being coerced to sign something, I have a saying, I think you'll probably like it. Don't sign anything till you know everything. And that's where lawyers come in, right? I love what you talked about, the real world, the perceived world, and the legal world, correct? Those three.
They don't match. They don't
overlap. Match. They really don't. And even in mental health, sometimes we have decision trees and your friends might be calling you bipolar when you may be traumatized. Don't sign anything when you're traumatized, fatigued. Wait much longer than 2 days after anesthesia if you have a serious decision to make. And just to pay attention to yourself and your true desires. So thank you. And if anyone wants to find Seth, again, it's nelsonlg.com. And also please listen to his podcast, How to Split a Toaster. There are so many good things on there for people anywhere.
Yeah. And just so people know, it's How to Split a Toaster. It's a divorce podcast about saving your relationships. Yes. And the main relationship we talk about saving is the one with yourself.
Yes, that's how you don't get unduly influenced. I always tell people, if you're conscious of your subconscious drives, you cannot be unduly influenced or coerced by anybody. If you're conscious of your subconscious and you pay attention to your tension, then you'll be good. So any closing thoughts?
I just appreciate, the time that we spend. I appreciate you reaching out. And I always tell people, if anything I say is helpful, use it. If it's not, don't.
Correct. Same here. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye-bye.